This is a tutorial exclusively for the Dyenasty WAXON's mailing list. Today I'm going to teach you how I do low water immersion dyeing, which is one of my absolute favorite methods of using fiber reactive dyes. The reasons I love low water immersion are that you don't have to do any tying of your garment or your fabric. So there's no rubber bands, there's no string, there's no taking the time to form any sort of patterns. It's literally stuff it in a bucket. And when you stuff it in a bucket, the dyes, the fabrics are going to naturally make all kinds of organic patterning all over the fabric. So this is going to be a quickie tutorial just to give you an overview of how I do it. And then if you want to learn even more and get more into the details, I recommend joining the online course, which at the time of filming has not been released yet. But maybe by the time you're watching this, there will be a full online course for low water immersion dyeing. So let's get into what you're gonna need to do low water immersion dyeing. I should say that there are tons and tons of ways to do low water immersion dyeing. I started with Paula Birch's method, and I have sort of evolved over the years into doing it my own way, and it's what works really well here for us at WAXON Studio, and I'm just in love with the ease and the surprise and the beautiful variations you can get. So I'm gonna show you a few examples of some things that we've low water immersion dyed just in the past couple weeks here. So we're working on some tea towels. And so here's a great example. This is Dharma Trading Company's shiitake colorway. I'm actually really surprised at how this came out. It looked totally brown in the bucket, but it just goes to show, and we're gonna talk about that again in a little bit, like the color in the bucket does not always represent the color that you're gonna get, especially after washing, after drying. So don't judge a dye bath based on its wet form. If you look at all the beautiful variations that you can see in this cloth, isn't that amazing? I mean, there's just so much, there's so much going on. I always feel like the crocodile hunter when I'm talking about this. I'm like, look at this, isn't it amazing? Isn't she a beaut? I love it. So that was the shiitake. This is eggplant. Really surprised at how that came out. It usually is a much cooler purple, almost like a purpley brown, when we do it non-low water immersion style. So when I mix it into a bottle for direct application, or when I'm using it for batiking. And then the last one, this one's custom colors, not Dharma. This is custom colors version of Mermaid's Dream. And for whatever reason, you can see this one just didn't get as much coloration. Striations would be the word. There's just not as many striations going on through here. So it's magical. Like I tell everybody, home dyeing is not going to meet your needs if you're a perfectionist, but if you're into surprises and letting the organic nature of these fabrics and these molecules do what they do, then you are gonna have a good time. So we get texts and messages here a lot at the studio being like, but like, how do I get exactly that shade? I'm like, oh, you don't. Relax, shake it off, let the dyes do what they're gonna do, aim for a slice of the color wheel rather than a really precise point on the color wheel, and just get ready to be surprised. Today, I'm gonna be over dyeing this old shirt that I've had in my closet for a long time. And I noticed, I put it on the other day and I was like, oh, this is exactly the color of my skin tone. That doesn't look nice. I want to over dye this, and it's old and it's got holes and it's got some paint splattered on it. So it's going to be a great example. And I'm a really big fan of upcycling. That's why we developed our budget ice dye kits, so that you can use things that are already in your closet, or better yet, go to the thrift stores, go to clothing swaps, find clothing items that are made out of cellulose fibers. And I'll put a link into my list of what cellulose fibers are. That is what is designed for use with fiber reactive dyes. I'm going to be making up a low water immersion bath with Dharma Trading Company's Rust Brown. It's a beautiful color. It is full of surprises. We're going to be using a tablespoon of dye powder and a half cup of soda ash. Now that I'm saying that to myself, I'm like, you know what? It's gonna make a big dye bath, so I'm gonna find something else to stuff in there. Low water immersion means we're gonna be using the lowest possible water amount for the garment that we're putting in there. So I stuff it in, and then I sort of notice how far it comes up in the bucket. This comes up to about 1/3. And so I'm gonna fill this up with no more than 1/3 of the way up with water. And so that's how I estimate how much I wanna do. I just put the dry fabric in there and go, okay, where does it come up to? And of course it's gonna take up a little bit less room when it is wet. Yeah, we're not gonna make this giant dye bath where we could stir things around in. We're gonna make a low water dye bath, the stuff it in the bucket method. We're gonna be pasting up our dyes and then activating it with the soda ash before we stuff the fabric in here. So you make an active bath when you are ready to stuff it in a bucket. And the dress that I'm wearing is a low water immersion, stuff it in the bucket, moss green from a long time ago. I was actually looking in my closet this morning for something to wear for this video, and I found this dress and I completely forgot that I owned it. So I was like, well, that's perfect. It's low water immersion. I'll wear it for the video. I'm gonna go find one more thing to stuff into this dye bath. Okay, this is perfect. We're just gonna do another cotton tea towel, and then we'll be able to see the difference in the rust brown on something that was already a color and something that started bright white, optically lightened white. All right, let's go. What I've done here is I've taken my bucket and I filled it up to that sort of 1/3 point. And I have my rust brown fiber reactive dye. I have a clear-sided jar to do my pasting up in. And I have one of my favorite tools ever, a plastic picnic spoon. We use these babies over and over and over, and I really like how this all works. So I'm going to take 1 tablespoon of fiber reactive dye powder, stick it in there, close it up, and now, you can clean your spoon in the bucket. Just get a few of those little molecules off, and that way when you set your spoon down on your table, you're not delivering dye powder everywhere. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm going to dip into my bucket and I'm going to put a little bit of water in my jar. So this is filled maybe, 1/3 of the way up. You don't have to measure this water. It's gonna go right back into your bucket. This is for pasting up. So if you haven't seen this in my other videos, pasting up is what we call making a slurry of the powdered dye and mixing it into water so that all those little molecules have a chance to dissolve here and now in the jar before it goes into the bigger bucket of water. So if you've ever mixed any powder into water, the less water you have, the easier it is for your stirring implement to get in there and sort of smush. In other words, it would be really hard for me to effectively stir all this powder into water if I would never dump the tablespoon of dye powder into my water bucket because it would just take forever with the stirring. And any color that has red in it, any color that has a red molecule in it, which clearly rust brown does, is gonna require extra stirring. Red is just one of those bitch-ass molecules that does not like to dissolve. Reds are just trickier. So I'm gonna be stirring this for a little while. Always use your bucket to clean things off. It just is a nice time saver. Here's another nice time saver. If you have a lid that you trust for your jar, you can give a little shake. I think I trust this lid today. Let's hope so, because I have a lot of really nice things on the table that I don't want to get splashes on. This just helps break down, dissolve some of those molecules. Okay, let's check it. Foamy. Clean my lid. The reason I'm cleaning everything in the bucket is because I don't want to lose any of that dye. I really want to use everything I've got. And you know what? There was a teeny little splash. Another really helpful thing to have is a long plastic spoon. We use these guys over and over. I'm going to pour my pasted up dye, my slurry, if you will, into the bucket, and I'm going to stir as I go. Now I know that rust brown has a lot of red in it, so I'm gonna be checking the bottom of the container. Oh yeah, there's so much powder left in there. And I guarantee you, these are the red tones. So I'm gonna scoop a little bit more water in here and give it another stir, give it another splash around. If you're doing this with a blue, with a turquoise, with a green, or a yellow, well, no, not orange, sorry. Any cool colors that don't have red mixed into them, you don't have to worry about all of this. Of course, I picked a tricky color to do for the video, because that's the color I want my shirt to be. Selfish love of the dyer. We're gonna do my color today. So look how much more red that is going in. And now we've got a clean bottom with no more red powder at the bottom. Again, we're using fiber reactive dyes. Fiber reactive dyes are for cellulose fibers. That's not to say that you can't use these dyes with protein fibers. Protein fibers such as wool and silk will take color with these dyes, but it's not what the dyes are designed for. These are super safe to use at home, low impact dyes. They're the most environmentally friendly on the synthetic dye spectrum. I love them because they offer impeccable color fastness, wash proofness. Over the years, I've had things that I dyed a decade ago or more, and they still look great. I'm giving it a little bit more stirring now just to make sure that all of my dye is thoroughly mixed in. And believe it or not, we're only one step away now from being ready to immerse our fabric in here. Okay, so we have our dye powder. The next step is our soda ash powder, sodium carbonate for easy pouring. I keep mine in this old, I guess this was like a sugar container. I'm gonna measure half a cup. The amount of soda ash you want to use definitely changes depending on the weight of the fabric that you're putting in, how much water, your strength of color, and y'all, we're not going to get into that right now, but just know that this is sort of a foolproof amount that I use. I'll be honest with you, when I'm doing batik, I use less soda ash because soda ash likes to eat into the beeswax, and it can lessen the strength of the lines with the beeswax, especially if you leave it for a long time. So because there's no batik going in here, I'm gonna use the full-on half a cup. Here's another fun thing about fiber reactive dyes. As I stir the activator in here, your bath changes color. You honestly cannot judge a dye bath by the initial color. And isn't that fun? It's looking beautiful. I should also mention, I use Dharma dyes almost exclusively and have for about 20 years. The Dharma poster that you can order has a color swatch for every color that they make, and there is a disclaimer on the bottom of that. The color swatch is they dyed cotton, took a picture of it, digitally put that picture into a big graphic design, and then printed it on paper. So there's a lot of color shifts that can happen just in the photography, in the printing, yada yada. So even though the color swatch shows you one particular color, that does not mean that's what you're gonna get in your dye bath, in your bottle. It's absolutely not what you're gonna get with ice dye, but that's a whole other video. I take that swatch as a suggestion of what we're gonna see. Okay. Now's the time to not talk as much because we have an activated dye bath. An activated dye bath, the shelf life is now like, boo, going down. So I'm going to stuff this tea towel, this cotton tea towel in here. I'm shoving it in, I'm pushing it down. The less you mess with it, the more patterning you're gonna have. I wanna get it stuffed down in there and I wanna leave it alone. Now, as you can see, there's quite a lot of room in here. There's a lot of liquid left to be soaked up. That's not exactly a low water immersion. Good thing we're fitting one more thing in here. So here's the before. This shirt, sort of a honey color. It's very close to my skin tone. It makes me look a little bit sick and washed out. So we're gonna stuff this in here and turn it into a better color. What I'm doing right now, I call burping the fabric. I wanna get as many air bubbles out as I can and I'm sort of aiming for like, I'm only gonna push as much as I need to get the air bubbles out and get most of the fabric sitting below the surface. But I'm not gonna push so much that it counts as like stirring it up, because the more stirring I do, the more solid of a color you're gonna get. Also, the higher the water, the more solid of a color you can get. If you have annoying pieces of fabric that insist on coming up above the surface, you can take your jar, fill it with a little bit of your dye bath, and then smoosh it down. Make your jar sit on top of the fabric and it will hold it down. So we're gonna let this sit overnight. Right now it is 10:15 a.m. So we'll come back 24 hours from now, the next day, and we'll do the wash out and the dry, and we'll see what it looks like.